Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Millard Fillmore, and the focus is Grief-Stricken, Know Nothing. The year is 1853, and this is actually beginning the most difficult period in Fillmore's life, and the difficulties had started out not to do with politics, but personal. His wife, Abigail Fillmore, had been ill throughout much of his presidency, and then things got worse on his last day in office. During the inauguration ceremonies of his successor, Franklin Pierce, it was snowing, freezing cold. They were sitting outside on the steps of the Capitol, and at the end of the day, Abigail Fillmore did not feel well. The Fillmores were originally planning to go on a big trip right after his presidency came to an end, but they canceled those plans, moved into the Willard Hotel right across the street from the White House, and they started to watch her under a doctor's care to see if she could recover. Millard Fillmore was by her side every hour, minute by minute, for day after day. 3 weeks later, though, she had not recovered and she eventually passed. March 30th, 1853, at the age of 55, Abigail Fillmore died. Millard Fillmore was prepared for the end of his presidency, but he was not prepared for the loss of his wife. She had been his rock, a major part of his life for a quarter century. He said, for 27 years, my entire married life, I was always greeted with a happy smile. All of his plans were now on hold. There would be no trip. He was considering a job in New York City, decided to not do that, moved back home. He buried his wife in what would become the family plot in Buffalo. But things were not getting better. Week after week, he was still under the state of melancholy, which he shared in a note with his close friend Dorothea Dix, the champion of the mentally ill in the United States that Fillmore had gotten to know over the years. And he wrote that it does not seem like home. The light of the house is gone, and I can never hope to enjoy life again as I have heretofore. It was a significant period of grief. Fillmore was trying to figure out what to do next. He thought about work, maybe going back into the law, but that just didn't feel right for an ex-president to be trying cases again in a local court, so he was trying to figure that out. He did have his daughter, Abby, who had just turned 21, move back into the home with him, help take care of him, give him some comfort, companionship, so this was a positive. His son, Powers, also moving back with them to Buffalo, opened up his own law office, and on a regular basis, Fillmore would actually walk to his son's law office to converse with him and the other lawyers, to try to stay active, still trying to figure out what to do next in his life. Well, he eventually does decide to take that big trip he was planning to the South. He was always more popular in the South, and so this should be friendly territory for him. And he did have his longtime law partner, Nathan Hall, who had also served as his Postmaster General, along with John Kennedy, who had been his Secretary of the Navy, and they went on this trip to the South. They had a good time, but it was very subdued, not like the original trip that they had planned. He gave some speeches, but he avoided all controversial topics. It was good for him to get out. It was friendly territory, but again, a pretty subdued trip. And then things got worse. July of 1854, just a little over a year after his wife had passed, his daughter Abby went on a single day trip to Aurora, New York, just outside of Buffalo, to help her grandfather, Fillmore's father, move into a new home with his new wife. Well, Abby Fillmore had always been healthy, and she showed up and she was fine, but by that evening she wasn't feeling well. They called the doctor came in, he diagnosed cholera. He said, things don't look good. Send for the father, send for the brother. Sure enough, they did. Millard Fillmore and Powers Fillmore showed up the next day, but by the time they got there, it was too late. Abby Fillmore died, 22 years old that morning, and Millard Fillmore had now lost his wife. He'd lost his daughter, and the day that he buried his daughter next to his wife in the family plot, he found out that his brother Charles, only 36 years old, had also died that very same day. Overwhelmed with grief, Millard Fillmore now for quite some time, and he shared some of that grief with his grief for his country that was breaking apart. Fillmore, as president, had signed into law the Compromise of 1850 that he thought this grand compromise was going to fix all the problems in the country related to slavery. Everyone would rally around the Union and the Constitution and things would be fine. But that was not the case. The fugitive slave law that he tried to rigorously enforce in the North had created all kind of backlash in the North, so that was fracturing. And then along in 1854, you had the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a rush of abolitionists from the North and slaveholders in the South rushing into the Kansas territory, trying to claim whether or not it would be a free or a slave territory. That was becoming violent. This path to national fracture was getting worse, not better. From a political standpoint, the landscape here had changed a bit as well. The Whigs that Fillmore had been a part of for the last couple of decades kind of went away after his presidency. The question was, what was going to potentially now rival the National Democrats? And there were a couple of splinter groups coming out of the old Whig Party. One was very much a sectional northern group, and Fillmore's former friends and nemesis in the state of New York, Thurlow and William Seward, were big parts of the establishment of the Republican Party. They maintained many of the former Whig tenets, but they also added as their principal focus a commitment to no more expansion of slavery in the United States anywhere outside the states in which it already existed. Now, this was not what Millard Fillmore believed in. This was not an ideology he could rally around. He still saw this was a fringe, abolitionist-leaning movement, so that was not going to be for him. Maybe this other splinter group might be for him, and it was called the American Party. The American Party was an America First, a nationalist party, a pro-America perspective that also embraced some of those Whig tenets, like protective tariffs, to help protect American industry against international competition. But below the surface, things were a little bit more insidious because the pro-America policies of the American Party were really based on anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic discriminatory policies. And we'll take both of those on. The anti-immigrant part was largely because there had been a big rush of immigrants coming over from Europe, and a lot of them situated now in the big cities in the American Northeast. And the native-born workers were angry with this fact because a lot of the immigrant workers were willing to work for very low wages in very bad working conditions, in part because they may have been better than what they had experienced in Europe, but this was not helping raise the overall profile of the working conditions and wages for the American worker. And so the native-born were having a backlash against these immigrants, and was taking on a political tone under the guise of the American Party. Anti-Catholic. Well, this was a little bit different. There was a sense that if Catholics would start winning political positions, all the way up potentially to the President of the United States, that Catholics in office in the United States would be more beholden to the Pope than they would be to the Constitution. And they got it worked up to try to come up with legislative ways, political ways, to keep Catholics from taking on political spots in the United States. So this America First nationalist party, called the American Party, really was this discriminatory, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic party. Now, most folks don't know the name of the party as the American Party because it gave a different name. And this came about because people would ask, are you a member of the American Party? And the stock answer was, I know nothing. Why? Because they were embarrassed, perhaps, for the discriminatory nature of the party. But it became known as the Know Nothing Party, and that's what it's still more commonly known as today. Well, nativist clubs started popping up across the United States. There was a big following here. The Order of the Star Spangled Banner was the biggest of these groups in New York City, about 200,000 followers. And the Know Nothings were starting to win elections, particularly at the state level. So Millard Fillmore is looking at this landscape. He's not going to join the Democrats. He doesn't believe in their ideology and what they've been pitching for his entire career. He is not going to align himself with the Republicans because he doesn't believe in their core principles. But what about this American Party? Well, he did give some comments that would lean himself toward the know-nothings. He said that Americans should govern America. Those who were governed by monarchies of the old world by habit, education, and knowledge of our institutions were unprepared to govern America. And sure enough, on January 1st, 1855, he took the secret rites in his Buffalo home to become a member of the Order of the Star Spangled Banner. He continued along these lines by saying, I have for a long time looked with dread and apprehension at the corrupting influence with which the contest for the foreign vote is exciting upon our election. Where is the true-hearted American whose cheek does not tingle with shame to see our highest and most courted foreign missions filled by men of foreign birth to the exclusion of the native born? There were clearly some alignment for him with the know-nothing ideology and party principles. Well, what did Millard Fillmore do? Did he lobby to try to become a member of this party and actually a political spot, maybe even nominated for President of the United States? This was, after all, an election year, was just around the corner. Well, Millard Fillmore did not do that. he went on a vacation to Europe, an extended trip to Europe. And actually, he had a great time. He was feted by royalty at multiple countries, really with high respect for a former American president. It really actually did him well. He enjoyed it, and mostly he stayed out of the political wars that were going on between the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Know-Nothings back in the United States. While he was gone, the Know-Nothings met in convention, and they did not consider anybody other than Millard Fillmore for the top of their ticket. They nominated him for President of the United States alongside Andrew Jackson Donnelson. Andrew Jackson's former nephew was now nominated to be his vice president of the United States. But even at this point, Fillmore, who accepted the nomination from abroad, did not rush back. He didn't come back to the United States until June of the election year, 1856, with just a couple of months left until the actual national canvass would take place. He gave some speeches. In fact, on his way back from New York City to Buffalo, he was on a train. On the back of the train, he spoke to about 25 different audiences. But interestingly, throughout all of this, he really stayed away from the nativist discriminatory elements of the party. He just didn't talk about it at all. His focus was on the good of the nation, the Union, a national candidate for a national country representative. He was fearful of what would happen if the Republicans took power. He said on his campaign that that would lead to a civil war. I can tell you that we are treading upon the brink of a volcano that is liable at any moment to burst forth and overwhelm the nation. Pretty prescient, actually. It was just 4 years delayed until the Republicans did win that election and the fracture did occur. But he also was making it clear he wasn't going to be a sectional or really a native or party-driven candidate. He was going to be a national candidate. He said if there be those either North or South who desire an administration for the North as against the South, or for the South as against the North, they are not the men who should give their suffrages to me. For my own part, I know only my country, my whole country, and nothing but my country. He, throughout the campaign, the brief part where he was around, he really shied away from the discriminatory nature of the Know-Nothing Party, which was continuing in the Know-Nothing campaign of themselves, but he stayed out of that and really just tried to focus on the bigger picture of bringing the Union together. Well, the results were not great for Millard Fillmore. He did run as a successful third-party candidate in that he got to 21% of the vote. 873,000 people cast their vote for Millard Fillmore, which was better than any third-party candidate had ever done, but he won only one state. He picked up Maryland and 8 electoral votes. This was not a close contest, as James Buchanan, the Democratic nominee, he pretty easily beat John Fremont, the Republican candidate, 174 to 114 in the Electoral College. The Republicans really limited to just the northern part of the country in terms of the outcome of that vote, and James Buchanan, a Democrat, would be going to the White House. What does this mean for Millard Fillmore? Because his political career had now come to an end, and he has been really criticized strongly by historians for even getting in bed with the Know-Nothings in the first place. Thought it was a prideful move to try to get himself back in the White House and in charge, and to side with these these discriminatory policies, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic. Why would he do that? Well, he did it because in his mind, he thought this was a way to save the country. He believed that if the country had someone like himself who looked beyond the sectional differences and could look at the national best interest, that maybe he could forestall or delay or even stop a move to national fracture. That was his belief. And if he believed he had to do that by getting in bed with folks who had some things that maybe he didn't really feel strongly about, that was worth doing. The ends would justify the means in this case if he could be successful. So that's why he embraced the fugitive slave law. Even though it was very unpopular in the North, he thought that was going to be necessary to keep the country together when he was president. And it appears to be why he embraced the Know-Nothings, because he thought that was the only chance to perhaps keep the country together, even though it had some of these policies that he really didn't care for. He never really talked about those. He went away to Europe. He came back. He certainly did not campaign on the anti-immigrant or anti-Catholic rhetoric that was so common with the Know-Nothings. Nevertheless, it is part of a taint. It is part of his legacy, and it is part of the end of his political career. That is Millard Fillmore, Grief-Stricken and Know-Nothing, from the life of Millard Fillmore. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.